You're listening to the E2C Network, podcast by Auburn fans for Auburn fans.
Hello and welcome to War Horses, the only college equestrian podcast that's trying to bring you live coverage of the college equestrian postseason. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Let's talk about college equestrian. Well, the conference tournaments are over and the NCEA has released their final rankings that will determine the seeds for the 2021 National Championships. So let's talk about those. Now, if you recall, I gave my final rankings in the last episode, and I made some predictions about how the NCEA was probably going to make some changes to the rankings and mess a whole bunch of stuff up. Well, I was wrong. Somewhat. They didn't get Fresno State and Baylor right, but I think they accidentally got just about everything else right. So, good job, NCEA. Now, let's run through those. These are their rankings, not mine. And this is how everything's going to get seeded in the National Championship Tournament in Waco next week. At number 1 is Auburn. Now, we all knew Auburn was going to be the number 1 seed, and that was no shock to anybody. At number 2 was another expected team, Oklahoma State. Apart from their opening season loss, the Cowgirls have been perfect. They won the Big 12 tournament, so they are easily the second best resume in the country. At number 3, this is where I gave the NCAA a lot of unearned grief. I really expected them to put SMU here, but wisdom prevailed, and they put Georgia at number 3 just as I did. So next, they put SMU at number 4. Now, SMU did win the ECAC tournament, and I figured that was going to be enough for the league to put them ahead of Georgia, which was, the SEC runner-up. But when you go back and look at SMU's schedule, their wins are not as impressive as Georgia wins, and because they routinely beat Texas A&M and South Carolina, 2 pretty good teams. So I'm actually pretty surprised that the NCAA did not make SMU number 3, and I kind of secretly wonder if they did this so that the SEC runner-up would not be on the same side of the bracket as the SEC champion. Now, next at number 5, they have Texas A&M. Now, here's where I'm pretty sure that they monkeyed with the rankings to get a better seed matchup. I have been higher on the Aggies than the NCEA has all season long, and even I put TCU ahead of A&M. But if they had gone and put TCU in this position, it would have created another Georgia versus Texas A&M contest on day 1, and I think we've had enough of those, at least for a little while. So I'm pretty sure that what they did was they felt like these two teams, TCU and Texas A&M, were close enough to each other that it didn't matter if they flipped them in the name of creating a better bracket, and I am okay with this. So at number 6 is TCU. The Horned Frogs have a better resume than A&M. They've beaten and lost to every Big 12 opponent. Plus, they were the Big 12 runner-up now, and that shows that they are pretty good. Now, down at number 7 is Fresno State. The Bulldogs had a good season. They defeated TCU and Baylor in the regular season, but then they lost to Oklahoma State, SMU, and UC Davis in the regular season. Then, when they got into the Big 12 tournament, they got destroyed by TCU and then lost kind of badly to Baylor in the consolation meet. So, at number 8 is Baylor. Now, the Bears beat TCU in the regular season, and they trounced Fresno State in the Big 12 consolation meet, and then they lost pretty much all their other meets. But still, I had Baylor ahead of Fresno State in my rankings because I think they demonstrated that they are better than the Bulldogs last week. But the NCAA really likes Fresno State, and I'm going to just tell you that the only reason Fresno State has any conference wins is because all season long, every time they rode in a Big 12 meet, it was 4 riders going against 4 riders. And they did this to conserve on the number of horses needed. But when they got to the Big 12 tournament, they had enough horses to do 5-on-5. And you could see that Fresno State is not as good as everyone else in the conference when you get to 5-on-5. But here's the thing. The NCEA tournament is also 4-on-4, or at least it has been in the past. Now, they could change it this year, but I haven't seen anything that indicates they're going to do that. So we're just going to assume that it's 4-on-4. So in that case, yes, Fresno State is probably slightly better than Baylor. And so I think that the NCAA kind of accidentally got the seeding correct here, but they really didn't deserve to, but they did. And what that does is it means that Auburn will truly face the lesser opponent, which is Baylor, and Oklahoma State is going to have to play the opponent that is a little bit better when you consider how they do in 4-on-4 meets. So now they also ranked teams that aren't going to the tournament, that what they're calling are potential fill-ins in case we have a team that gets that loses out on their postseason opportunity because of COVID and contact tracing. So they have a list of replacement teams that would take over in those cases. And those are in order: South Carolina, then Delaware State, then UT Martin, and then South Dakota State. Now, UC Davis is not in that list, and I'm assuming that they just opted out. And if you'll remember that they had real trouble scheduling meets and stuff, and so I think for them, they just said, you know what, we're done. This is fine. So those are the matchups. Now, I'm going to go into a lot of detail next week, but right now I'm just going to give you the highlights of what I really like about this bracket. First, I like that Auburn and Georgia are on different sides of the bracket. I think Georgia has the potential to really create some havoc in this tournament, and I'd like to see how teams like TCU and Oklahoma State deal with Georgia. So I'm glad they're on that side of the bracket. Now, Auburn gets Baylor to start out with. I think this is a good matchup for Auburn. Baylor has a handful of good riders, and they'll probably get some points from Auburn, but I think it's a nice first meet for Auburn to begin with in the tournament. SMU versus Texas A&M should be a really good matchup. I think Texas A&M could pull the upset here, but if they don't, I like Auburn's chances against the Mustangs in the second round. Georgia versus TCU in the first round should be a really good matchup. I expect Georgia to win that, but TCU will be tough for them. And if the Bulldogs do advance, I kind of like their chances against Oklahoma State. I think we could see Georgia upset the Cowgirls and produce another all-SEC final between, Auburn and Georgia. But we'll see how that goes. Like I said, I'll do an in-depth breakdown of each team's strengths and weaknesses, and I'll tell you which ones tend to benefit when we go from 5 riders down to 4 riders in each event. Now, also, the NCEA is holding a single discipline national championship tournament, and it's only got 2 teams. I originally thought it was going to be 3 teams, but they decided just to do a single championship meet, and that's going to involve number 1 Sweetbriar and number 2 Lynchburg. And this is actually going to be a rematch from the regular season meet that they rode against each other at Auburn. But this time it's for the single discipline national championship. So there you go. So, with the national championship approaching, I wanted to take a step back and just consider how I cover the sport and the postseason. So, rather than just have me talk to myself as I usually do, I thought I would bring in an expert, a guest on the subject of sports journalism. So I asked a friend of mine, John Carvalho, to step in for a quick chat. Now, John is a professor of journalism at Auburn University, and he specializes in sports journalism.
Hello, John, and welcome to War Horses.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, John, I get a sense that you've been around the block a time or two in sports journalism. Is that correct?
Well, I guess you could say that. I started out in newspaper sports reporting, moved on to magazines for a while, and then got into teaching journalism, mainly sports journalism. So, sure.
Now, with your experience of your students, what do you think are some of the main motivating factors that a person gets into sports journalism?
Well, a lot of times a student will tell me that they go into sports journalism or sports media of some form because they love sports.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a good start, but I definitely don't think that's enough to take it all the way through.
So what else makes the perfect sports reporter?
Well, to me, and I think I'm working from my own motivation a lot, you've got to love the process of writing and of communicating to an audience. Because if you're going to be a sports journalist, it's not just that you love sports, it's that you love communicating to a sports audience and are willing to do the things that help you and make you a better communicator for the sports audience.
Okay. Well, I think one of the things in my case in particular are that I have going for me is that this is at least I think, a very underserved niche in college athletics. I feel like, there just aren't a lot of people reporting and writing and particularly giving analysis of college equestrian. these are stories, these are events of note and merit, and nobody is really talking about them, or at least not talking about them in a way that I think the casual sports fan wants to get that information. And so that's really why I got into this. It was not so much to, be a media mogul someday. It's really just to sort of spread the word of something that I felt like wasn't getting out there enough.
And that's the case with a lot of niche sports, and that's something that even you'll see at the college level, that there are certain sports that serve an audience that may be more committed to that than the population as a whole. Obviously, sports like football and basketball are always going to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
But on the college level, you'll have sports like not only equestrian, but I think of college wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
I think of fencing, volleyball, that draw a very interested audience.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's an audience that's interested that you can reach. With Auburn, where Auburn having the success that they've had in equestrian certainly draws the attention
mm-hmm.
of a lot of people. It's just hard to transform that attention into interest and engagement.
Well, okay, so let's get into more detail on that specific issue then, because recently I've had sort of a revelation in the last 2 months, really. Because one of the things I've started doing is during the meet, I'll tell people, okay, this rider here, we expect, her to get that point in this head-to-head, or this one on the other team, that favors her. These two riders are so close, it's a toss-up. And I really think that I'm onto something with that. It gives the casual fan who doesn't know anything about college equestrian a frame of reference of what is expected. So hearing that, what's your impression of that theory that I have?
Well, I think one of the things that, as you were describing it, I think is an important part of what you do and the service that you can provide is actually an explanation of the sport to the viewer. We might have thought that they would just ride for show, for judging, and that would be it. That it would be kind of like gymnastics, which is not done head-to-head, so to speak, because
Mm-hmm.
they all do their thing in different parts.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that there's a competition there is definitely something that people might be interested to see, especially when it's Auburn competing against another school.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and so you're right, and it is very different from many other sports that do judge sports like that. But I think that even with, like, let's say you were a fan who's gone to a meet and you're aware of that, just hearing these names, you're not necessarily going to know, well, how good is that girl? Do I truly think this Auburn rider is supposed to beat this girl for Georgia or South Carolina or whomever? So I think that's the other part of what I do with the analysis is I set the stage and I say, look, we expect this girl to get her point against that girl. So I think it really helped the audience to say, oh, okay, now I get it. I understand how dominant Auburn is. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? That, informing people about just expectations.
I think what interests me about that model is it kind of shows that in your case, people have different levels of engagement with the sport.
Mm-hmm.
To the beginner, to the person who's just getting interested in it, they're still learning about the sport. But every sport has its fans. And again, getting back to more like the wrestling model,
mm-hmm.
that head-to-head, even though those names may not be familiar to all of the school's fans, those names are familiar to the sports fans, and especially to the Auburn fans. So there's that. The other side of it that I think can engage even the more casual fan is that in predicting the outcome of matches, you're also predicting the outcome of the meet.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to something like Auburn, whether it's facing one of its toughest rivals or whether it's in the conference meet,
mm-hmm.
Conference championships or in the national championships, then people do have an interest as to whether they're going to win, whether they're going to repeat as national champions. The
mm-hmm.
other side of it is, and this is always the issue with sports and with any kind of media content, the way that people vote or show their support for a concept like that is with their attention. And so in terms of success, you're always challenged to demonstrate the size of your audience and signs of its involvement.
Okay. So yeah, and if I release it through, Twitter, I would have analytics that would show, okay, we've got so much engagement with these videos. The ones where I'm not doing the analysis, maybe the engagement is a different level. And so that would be that way of understanding, oh, okay, it is actually providing a service because there is attention that has been directed towards these videos.
Yeah. And one thing I'll tell you, and this is one place where the research, academic research, when we talk about broadcasting, we don't so much talk about impressive numbers and the money. Instead, we talk about the concept of suspense. That one of the reasons why sport is so popular on television is that it provides and in any broadcast mode, even live, is that it provides an element of suspense. And suspense in this case is defined as an uncertain outcome that'll be pleasant or unpleasant to the viewer. So, in essence, when you're talking about those things and a match is upcoming, and if it's an important match, within a competition, then yeah, the element of suspense, the threat to Auburn's winning streak, to its stature within the sport, that's something that can get the audience's engagement in a way that other things won't, like we talk about now, to compare to football, like when Auburn is playing Georgia as compared to when Auburn is playing, no insult intended, Mercer, obviously there's a different level of suspense. But the viewers will tell you that they enjoy watching a suspenseful game more than they enjoy watching a rout, because the suspense adds an engagement and a shared engagement with other people.
I see. I think I see what you're getting at. So, like, let's say I look at I pre-look at everything and I see, oh, okay, well, we're probably going to take about 12 of these 20 matchups, and then maybe, they're going to take another 5. And so then there's 3 that are toss-ups. And so maybe I make sure that I really kind of, highlight those toss-ups, because that is where the suspense is. Even though the overall question of, is Auburn going to beat this opponent, is probably already been answered, it's more savvy to say, well, here's what would interest the viewer the most, is to really highlight those toss-ups, because those have the tendency to really pique people's interest and draw them in and get them more engaged.
Yeah, and realistically, I mean, it could be that if they went in a different direction, it could be more threatening to Auburn's success, and more important than that.
Okay. Because, one of the things that I have also noticed is that the vast majority, and I mean vast majority, of everything that is being written and put out about this sport is coming from a source that is employed by one of the schools or by the league itself. The downside of that means that in an issue where, say, we don't know who's going to win this matchup between our rider and their rider, the Auburn sport person who's doing that writing, they're never going to be able to say that. They're never going to be able to say, oh, you know what, we could lose this matchup right here. Or if it's one where we really expect Georgia to their rider to beat our rider, there's no way that they would say, oh, that Auburn rider, yeah, she's probably going to lose that point. It's because that's not their job. They're prevented from saying that. Whereas I, as an independent source, I can tell people that. I think there's something there that, I think I'm onto something there. The fact that there's opportunity, because so much of what's being written and presented about the sport is coming from the schools themselves. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, what opportunity do I have here?
Well, I think you have the same opportunity that writers for local newspapers and for local sites like Auburn 24/7 and Inside the Auburn Tigers has. On the one hand, your audience is going to be people who are fans of the school and of the sport, specifically of the school's participation in that sport.
Mm-hmm.
And so they have that, what we call a disposition toward the program that would draw them to the school's information. On the other hand, they're interested in knowing what really is going to happen and can happen, and to discuss that. And even though the school itself might not provide that information, and the school isn't expected to provide that information, they know they can get that information from someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely the fans, even though they may support the school and its efforts, they know that they want that straight information, and that they're willing to search for it and to access it.
We're going to take a quick break from this episode for a special announcement. One of the things that we take great pride here at the E2C Network are our listeners are really our E2C Network family. Now, I know they enjoy listening to us, but let's be honest, every once in a while, they probably would like a little bit of change of pace. Well, that's where you come in if you're a business owner. If you have any interest in partnering with us in terms of ads or sponsorships on our podcast episodes, you can reach us at e2cnetwork@gmail.com. Let us help you reach the widest variety of Auburn fans out there. I mean, come on. Who else listens to a network where they cover everything from Auburn football to The Bachelor and the connections it has with Auburn? Utilize our podcast, Facebook Live shows, and other flexible partnership opportunities that are available upon request. Let us help you reach the E2C Network family and the Auburn family at large on how you might best be able to serve them. Reach out to us at e2cnetwork@gmail.com for more information. That's all we have for you in this special message. Let's get back into the episode.
So let's shift gears a little bit here and talk about me, my image, how I come off, and how could you even begin to classify what I am and what I do. Now, I'm half joking with some of that. Recently, with COVID, there's been a lot of restrictions as to who can go into some of these meets. And so I originally had some issues trying to get to a Georgia meet that Auburn was going to be at back in the fall. I applied for media credentials. I was told, well, you're seen as a blogger or you have a podcaster, but we don't give media credentials to those, so we're going to deny your request. And so this time around, when Georgia, with them hosting the equestrian, the SEC championship, I again applied, but I never heard a response back. So what are your thoughts on how should I go about presenting myself when I am making those requests for access that will give me the one that will be honest and fair, but also that will give me the best chance of getting in, of getting that media access?
Well, part of it involves, like you were saying, part of it, COVID overturned a lot of that with all sports. Mm-hmm. Even major outlets were having trouble getting access and would have to watch things on television to write about them. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And the hope is that as things begin to open up again, that the access will be increased. But one of the things I tell my students when they're trying to get access to do interviews or to cover things, one of the things that you do is you establish the credibility of your information. And so it used to be that when I was in magazine work and in the 80s, and we were a smaller magazine, we were a newer magazine, I would send samples. We would do our interview requests not only by phone, but by mail. And I would send ahead by mail, I guess today I do them as attachments, samples of what I had put out in our magazine did to these major sports teams and colleges. And I would say, hey, here's our magazine. We'd like to do an article on one of your athletes. Would you help us make contact with that person? Or sometimes it was directly to the athlete going through the team. Mm-hmm. So I would suggest that you or anyone in your situation, as you produce content, and then you would use that content to sell what you're doing to those various outlets and say, here's what I do, and I'd like access, I'd like credentials for the next competition. Now, what you've said with bloggers having a tougher time, mm-hmm. that's true. And what I'm amazed at, okay, and there, not so much with equestrian, so at least you don't as much have to put up with this, or maybe you do, but particularly in football, you'll see some discussions on Twitter where somewhere a local, maybe a smaller newspaper or radio station is very angry, and they'll write and they'll say, "Oh my goodness, they turned me down, but they gave a blogger a seat in the press box." And so I'm not so much concerned as which one was more deserving. I just find that competition and that rivalry between the established media and the newer media to be interesting. I don't know if that exists in equestrian.
I don't think it does, at least not yet. I mean, honestly, I find it hard to believe that there were a ton of media requests to go to the SEC Equestrian Championship. I really just don't. I think obviously the internal staff of all the schools, the sports information directors, their photographers, and assistants or writers, I think they were all granted because they're typically who would request, and then maybe the local paper might send somebody on championship day, probably not even on the Friday beforehand. And I think that's probably it. I would be shocked if the number went higher than one hand of independent people requesting access. So yeah, when we talk about competition, I lost out to nothing. So when I didn't get granted access, it wasn't that I'm complaining about local paper. I'm complaining about that, no one got access over me.
Well, and I think there what you're dealing with is a situation that obviously what you're doing is something that not a lot of people are doing. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where not only your, like I mentioned before, the samples of what you produce as showing that you're serious about this, mm-hmm. But maybe also any indications that you have of the audience, in essence, that what they're doing is they're helping you not just to watch a meet, not just to be at a meet, mm-hmm. but to then convey that meet to interested people who can't be there, which is the whole point of sports media. Mm-hmm. I think that's part of what you can be communicating. And again, like I said, this is a broad. Anybody can be communicating to these sports information offices or these folks who are granting credentials.
All right. Well, let's transition now into. I sent you before this interview. I sent you a PDF document that sort of summarizes my experience covering this sport. And this is what I sent. What I sent you is what I sent to Georgia. Okay. Can we talk through that? If you have it in front of you, can we go through that a little bit and just get your impressions on that? Now, obviously, the listeners don't know what John is looking at, so I'll describe it a little bit when we talk about certain elements. But yeah, John, so what's your impression of this document I sent you?
Yeah, I like it because mainly I think it did, and I should have mentioned that. It does a great job of conveying that, and I noticed too that it gives links to everything, so they can look at look it up themselves. Mm-hmm. I think it does a very good job of selling what you do.
Okay. Well, let me describe it really quickly. So what we've got here is there's a one-page PDF document, Adobe Acrobat document. So at the first part of it, it's basically divided into two columns. 2/3 of the document is the left-hand column, and then there's a skinnier column to the right. Now, most of the information is in that left-hand column, but down that right-hand side, I've got basically little screen captures of tweets that my listeners and people who love me have sent me over time, just commenting on things about, I felt more a part of it with your help. Thanks again. Thank you for trying to explain equestrian to me. So basically responses from my wonderful listeners and readers, just talking about, oh, okay, you add something to it. And then on the left-hand side, basically I broke it down into, well, first I start with a descriptive paragraph just talking about my real name, which I won't reveal here, but that I work under the persona of Auburn Elvis and that I do unique equestrian analysis. And then I list, my Twitter, or I show an example of 2 videos where I'm doing analysis and predicting who's favored in some meet and some head-to-head rides. And then I list the podcast that I do that you are listening to right now, dear listener. And then I have some of my writing examples where I do the rankings blogs, and I've also written a season recap for the Plaid Horse magazine. So your impression of this is that overall you think this is professional? I mean, because it is kind of graphical, and I do throw some icons in there, an Elvis icon, but you don't think that detracts from it? You think this is generally professional?
Well, that's the only difficult thing, and it's rather awkward to address at this point, is that typically you don't have a journalist adopting a persona while doing their job, and it's a unique situation. I think you can, when I say overcome it, I don't quite want to make it sound like that much of a negative, but I think you can work around that, and as I was thinking about that beforehand.
So you don't think Stephen A. Smith is a persona? You think he's a real person? He goes by that name. Yes, but Feinbaum, you think you don't think he hams it up a little bit for the camera?
He definitely does. But at one point, he was a reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer named Stephen A. Smith. So that, yeah. For goodness sakes, don't get me started on caricatures.
I've read some of what, yeah. So yeah. So is wearing an Elvis costume any worse than some of the caricatures that we see of like a Clay Travis and all of those?
I tell you, when they're and when you're dealing with information kind of with the meat and potatoes of what they do, even that's the real tragedy of it. I think personally, I would suggest there are two ways that you can work with that. One of them is, and you acknowledge it. You're saying this is who I am, but in essence, you draw, and even what you're saying right now, you draw a contrast. It's like, but this is serious stuff. You sometimes you can't just say 2 + 2 to your audience. You have to point out what I'm adding up to here is the number 4. I'm saying that I'm giving good information. Another thing that would help you here, I would suggest, again, for anybody else, and it's the same idea with why we send out information beforehand, is endorsements. And I would guess you have at least an acquaintance with Greg Williams and with his assistant coaches. And they can give endorsements to these other people and say, yeah, I know Auburn Elvis, and I know that he does good information. He is a credible member of the media. It would be another thing if you only were doing this so you could show up and clown, and you don't. Obviously, you don't. And there,
right.
The example I think we have there is the Barstool guy who the only way that they're like you is that some of them don't give their real name. And that's because they clown,
they insult, they
insult. Yeah, it's part of it's not respect for their content. It's more of a self-promotion thing. So in essence, what you're doing is you're giving, and sometimes, like I was saying, you need to point that out to people that this is serious stuff. This isn't a means to an end. This is the end. Is your interest in equestrian. So, and I think, again, the coaches can help with that. If you've made acquaintances with the more national niche publications that every sport has, that can also give you endorsements. You see down the side, the tweets that you provide give an endorsement there from audience members. If you can get something of similar tone, like I said, from coaches, even opposing coaches.
Oh yeah, I'm followed by several coaches that have tweeted and said, this is great, etc. So you're saying maybe look for one or two of those. Okay.
Yeah, think about it. It's almost like a book. When you see on a book in the back, you see those little blurbs that oh, what a wonderful analysis, so and so, and people will see the name, and then that means something to what they're saying. I think you've got individuals who are also have a stake in promoting the sport who would work with you on that and help these other folks to see that what you're going to do is going to be good and good for the sport, and they agree that the folks that you're contacting should help you with it.
Well, let's see. Wow. Okay. You got me excited. Because, see, when I sent this off and I heard nothing back, it was like, oh, my gosh, was this completely unprofessional? Did I mess this up? Because I'm not a journalism major. You know, I'm a business major. And so a lot of these, I attack these as more of a problem-solving type thing because, you know, that's how I learned it. And that's, you know, what I do daily in my real job. So, you know, I didn't know, is there some media faux pas I have committed, or is there something I've forgotten that I didn't know about that, you know, if I had been a journalist, I would have known it somehow magically. But from what I'm hearing, you know, some general professional business etiquette rules apply across the board, whether it's working with business people, whether it's working with media type. There's certain things you do. And as long as you're doing that, you come and doing it in a professional way, it's not so important that I don't have a journalism major behind me, you know, or a diploma on my wall.
And in fact, a lot of these entrepreneurial sports journalism projects are done by people who didn't major in journalism but wanted to do it and do it on the side, and that becomes that's where they focus that. And the flip side of it is, I realize that one of the things I'm teaching my students is how to approach such people, and how in presenting themselves and in presenting their opportunities, and in letting them know that if you're going to get someone to agree to an interview with you, you've got to show them that what you're going to do is something that'll tell their story to the greater audience. You know, and the same thing goes with you, but obviously, but the difference being that from professional experience and that you understand also, like you were saying, what you're doing in terms of communicating with people in a constructive way that helps them see what you're doing.
Okay. Well, yeah. So basically, after this interview, I'm going to be approaching someone since Baylor is the host school of the national championship tournament. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be approaching someone at Baylor, and so my hope is that I will have more success there than perhaps I had over at Georgia. So we'll see how that goes, but I'm definitely going to take a lot of your advice here and maybe refine what I've already done, this document a little bit, and probably follow it up with a phone call and just sort of try to convey verbally some of what, you know, we're talking about here, just the value of what I offer and things like that. So yeah. But before we go, I do want to sort of, I guess, share a story with you and with my listeners, because I sort of alluded to this. So yes, I did not get media permission I didn't get credentials to go to the SEC tournament last week. Now, I went, and it was closed to the general public. You had to be on a list. Basically, it was parents and family members, and so there would be this list. So, you know, when you're talking about the SEC equestrian tournament, it's not the same as the men's basketball or a bowl game in football where there's, you know, tickets being sold and legitimate security where they're checking IDs and stuff. I knew they weren't going to be checking IDs at this thing. Probably going to be some person with a clipboard at the gate. So that first day on Friday, I sort of roll up. I'm in a line with other cars, and, you know, the lady is there, and I'm like, hey, this is where the parent's supposed to go, right? And she's like, yep. And I just, boom, zoom right on in, you know, and I'm in the thing at that point. Now, what's really interesting is the next day, with it being championship and all, I guess the security was a little bit tighter. So when I arrived on Saturday, I roll down the window, the lady is there, and I can tell just from her demeanor, you know, she's going to be more thorough. So she asked me, name, please. And I'll tell you, Auburn has a writer whose last name is Pardon. Okay. Her name is Madison Pardon. And so when she asked name, I say Pardon. Now, their name is Parduhn. Now, if I was saying Pardon, like asking, excuse me, it's not my fault if that lady misheard me and thought I was saying the last name of the parents of one of our riders. And so she looks at her clipboard. Yep. Okay. You can go on in. And then boom, I'm in. So funny little story. Thanks to Jeff and Monica being named Pardon, I was able to get right on into the SEC championship.
Oh my goodness. I tell you, there in terms of covering things, I'll just simply say, it's a challenge sometimes to get in even to things, more serious events, more serious news stories and everything. So you just learn to do what you can do, obviously without doing anything that would disrupt or anything like that.
Exactly. Yeah. You don't want to do something illegal. Right.
Right.
So yeah, I kind of snuck in and was able to play off of a miscommunication.
So that's funny. I mean, you're not, again, it's not like you're going in there to clown, like Borat, to clown, to jump down and start singing,
Oh, right.
And also, I'm guessing you were not.
I was not in costume for most of it.
You're incognito.
Exactly. Yes, I was an investigative undercover reporter for most of it.
And I guess my question is, like, when you go, if you were to be granted credentials, this is an interesting thing, and it's an interesting thing to cover on a podcast. If you were granted credentials, would you have then gone in costume?
Yes, I would have, because when I go to a meet now, at Auburn, there was no restriction on having to be a parent or anything like that. So what I do at Auburn is how I would treat it anywhere. And I go in costume, and I have this tripod with a board on it with names that I can slide in and out, and I've got magnets on it, and I can put these little emoji magnets. I have tigers, and then whatever their mascot is, I have an emoji for that. And I slap them up there for each one of them. And then I have the camera, either I'm holding it or it's on a tripod as well. And I do my little bit, and I say, okay, we're here live at the Auburn Equestrian meet, or it would have been the SEC championship, and we've got equitation on the flat coming up. Let's look and see who's favored, and I'll run down there and I'll say, okay, Auburn this, Georgia there, this one's a toss up, and that's what I do. And so I would do that exact same thing, no matter where. I'm not out there leading cheers and all that, in between the meets and the rides. I'm just watching the rides and watching what's going on and trying to, keep up with scores. And did we get that point? Did we get upset? And that's exactly how I would be at any of the events. Wearing the costume is fun and I get noticed, but I draw attention, and I think I'm able to sort of, swing that attention more onto the sport by me being in the costume. But frankly, if Georgia had said, hey, we'll let you in if you promise not to wear the costume, then I would have gone without the costume, because, and what I ended up doing is I went without the costume, had the costume in my car, and I ran back into the car, sat in the car, put the costume on, and did my video updates from inside my car. And that's how I handled it.
Because and that's again, part of it was kind of what I was thinking through. In terms of actually covering an event, just covering it, you can do that out of costume. But yeah, there's a visual sense to it, to your reporting, and I can see the complication that would be where you'd have to do that back and forth like you were saying. So it's kind of a learning experience for me as well, figuring out how you do what you do.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm sure the listeners were kind of wondering why so many of my videos were inside my car. And it's because I didn't want to get kicked out.
Right.
Man, you've given me so much to think about and so much advice. I really appreciate it, John. So as we close out, how can people keep up with you? I know that you're going to be changing careers. You're going to be retiring here pretty soon.
Yeah, I'm going to be retiring. I'll continue. And hopefully I'll have more time. I have a blog of my own called The Sports Page. That's the URL is just johncarvalhosports.com. I try to do commentary on on Twitter, and people can link to me there, and then I'll link to anything that I write. But once I step back from teaching at the end of this semester and step back from faculty, I'll be continuing that stuff, because it's been a joy all these years to be involved so deeply in my passion, which is not only communicating to an audience, but communicating about such an important cultural component as sports, that it's not something that's going to go away once I stop. It's not like the day after I'm going to be like, thank goodness I was sick of that. No, to me, it's still one of the most interesting things to study.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate all your words of wisdom and the help you've given me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on War Horses today.
I enjoyed it.
All right. I am really excited that I got to have that discussion with John. There are definitely some tweaks that I'm going to make to my coverage of the national championship, having talked to him now. Also, I think I'm going to make some changes as to how I apply for my media pass this year's tournament, and I'm going to keep everybody posted on that saga as well. Now, let's talk about awards. Now that the regular season is over, the NCEA has announced its All-American lists. In fences, Auburn's Taylor St. Jacques was recognized as a first-team All-American. Her teammate Emma Kurtz was a second-team All-American, and Megan Napick and Michaela Langmeyer were honorable mentions in fences as well. Now, on the flat, St. Jacques also received a first-team All-American award, with Langmeyer receiving a second-team All-American award. Over in horsemanship, Auburn's Taylor Searles and Olivia Tordoff both received first-team All-American awards, and Deanna Green took a second-team All-American, and Maddie Spack received an honorable mention award. And over in reining, Auburn's Boo Kammerer was named a first-team All-American in this event. So congratulations to those Auburn riders and to all of this year's All-Americans. So that's it for our show this week. As I said, I will be putting together a comprehensive rundown of each of the national championship teams in the next episode, so look for that. Also, I will keep you posted here if there have been any new developments on my quest for media access to the tournament. Fingers crossed. I really hate to kind of sneak around and do another bunch of videos from my car, so I hope that doesn't have to happen. But we'll see. I'm willing to do anything. Wait. Before we go. I want to put in another word, a serious word here to any equestrian riders who may be listening. Please keep taking the necessary precautions about COVID. We've just seen Auburn's gymnastics team lose out on their entire postseason because of some positive results in contact tracing. And I know y'all do really well in the practices and all of that, but you have to be vigilant in every part of your lives right now for at least the next 2 weeks. And it's not just the positive results that knocks out the whole team, it's the contact tracing. So spending an extended period of time with other people without a mask on, that counts towards the contact tracing formula, even if you don't end up getting infected. So please keep that in mind. The goal here is not to just not get infected, but it's also not to trigger any quarantines from contact tracing. So please keep doing the necessary things to avoid triggering those contact tracing protocols. Everybody has worked so hard to make it to the postseason. Please don't knock yourselves out when you are this close. So, this has been another episode of War Horses. I am your host, Auburn Elvis. Thank you very much for listening. War Eagle and War Horses.
Before you get out of here, we want to remind you of a couple of things. Head over to e2cnetwork.com, our website where you can find everything that you'll ever need from us, podcasts, blogs, and even ways to help support the show. If you want to find individual episodes, you can download all of these on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. So until we see you again, I want to remind you of one thing, that here at the network, we believe in Auburn and love it. The only question remains, do you?